They didn't expose the system. They broke its ability to define reality. The ballroom of Aethelgard's Boston headquarters was designed to impress without appearing to try. Glass walls framed the city in cold precision, the skyline stretching like a promise no one fully trusted. Conversations overlapped in low, calculated tones, each one measured, each one carrying weight. Claire Sterling noticed patterns before she noticed people, and tonight the pattern was simple. Everyone here was selling something, even if they called it vision. She stood near the edge of the room, not hiding, just refusing to participate in the performance. A flute of champagne rested untouched in her hand, condensation slipping slowly against her fingers. Her attention was fixed on the presentation screens cycling through Aethelgard's achievements. Breakthrough therapies, global expansion, smiling children in curated images that felt too clean to be entirely honest. Numbers mattered more than images. Numbers didn't smile. Numbers didn't lie unless someone forced them to. You're the only person in the room not pretending to enjoy this. The voice came from her right, calm, observant, not intrusive. Claire turned, already prepared to dismiss whoever it was, but paused. The man didn't look like the others. No forced smile, no rehearsed posture. He held his glass loosely, as if he had forgotten it was there. "Maybe I just don't enjoy things that require pretending," she replied. A brief pause, then a small, genuine shift at the corner of his mouth. "That's fair." He didn't introduce himself immediately. That alone set him apart. Most people led with titles here, as if their names had to earn permission to exist. "Adrian Vance," he said finally, as if remembering it was expected. "Lead researcher on the pediatric hematology program." Claire nodded once. "Claire Sterling. Audit division." That changed the air between them. Not tension, not exactly, more like alignment. Two people suddenly aware that the other operated on structure, not illusion. "Then you're the reason everyone's behaving tonight," Adrian said. "No," Claire answered evenly. "I'm the reason they're careful." He studied her for a second longer than necessary, not in a way that felt invasive, but precise. Analytical. She recognized it immediately. The same way she evaluated discrepancies, he evaluated people. "And what do you see?" he asked. Claire didn't answer right away. She let her gaze drift back to the screens, where another success story faded into the next. "A system that works very hard to look perfect. And you don't believe it is." "I don't believe in perfect systems." That should have ended the conversation. It didn't. Instead, Adrian shifted slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough to separate their exchange from the noise around them. "What if imperfection is the cost of speed?" Claire turned back to him fully now. Speed toward what? He didn't hesitate. A cure. There it was. Not ambition. Not ego. Conviction. For the first time that evening, Claire felt something unexpected. Not agreement. Not disagreement. But interest. Real interest. "What are you working on?" she asked. "A treatment for a rare form of pediatric anemia," Adrian said. "Low survival rates. Limited options. We're close to something that could change that." "We," Claire repeated. He caught it. "The team. The data. The entire system, whether you trust it or not." Claire considered that. "And you trust it?" "I trust the outcome I'm trying to reach," he said. "The rest is negotiation." That word lingered longer than it should have. Claire had spent years dismantling negotiations disguised as compliance. Every irregularity she had ever found started with someone deciding that the outcome justified the adjustment. "You're comfortable with that?" she asked. Adrian met her gaze directly. "Are you comfortable letting people die because the process isn't clean enough?" The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defensive. It was precise. Claire didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't simple, and she didn't simplify truth. "I'm comfortable knowing that if something goes wrong, we'll understand why," she said finally. "And if waiting for that understanding costs lives, then we failed earlier than we think." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was structured, like both of them were mapping the same problem from different directions. Adrian exhaled slowly, then nodded once. "You're not wrong. And you're not entirely right," Claire replied. That earned a quiet, almost reluctant smile. Across the room, applause began as someone important concluded a speech neither of them had been listening to. The sound was sharp, synchronized, practiced. Claire glanced toward it, then back at Adrian. "You don't fit here," she said. "Neither do you," he answered. That should have been the end of it. A clean exchange, Two perspectives acknowledged. No need to continue. Instead, Adrian tilted his head slightly. Walk with me. It wasn't a request framed as a demand, and it wasn't casual enough to be meaningless. Claire hesitated for exactly 1 second, then set her untouched glass aside. They moved away from the center of the room, toward a quieter corridor where the noise softened into distance. The lighting shifted, less performative, more functional. Tell me what you actually do, Adrian said once they were alone enough that the conversation didn't belong to anyone else. I review internal financial and operational data, Claire said. I identify inconsistencies, risks, and potential liabilities. Meaning you find the things people don't want found. Yes. And what happens when you do? They get corrected. Always. Claire looked at him. Eventually, Adrian let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and something heavier. I'd like to believe that. You don't. I believe in results, he said. Not processes. And I believe results without process are unreliable. He stopped walking. So did she. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them had closed without either noticing. Not intentional, not accidental, just inevitable. As they walked back toward the lights of the ballroom, the silence between them was no longer one of strangers, but of co-conspirators. Claire felt her internal map recalibrating. She had entered the building to audit a company. She was leaving it to track a ghost in the machine. Tomorrow, then, Adrian said quietly before they parted. It wasn't an invitation. It was a deadline. Claire didn't sleep much that night. Not because she was restless in an emotional sense, but because her mind kept running structured loops through the same set of inconsistencies. Aethelgard's internal reporting system had been clean on the surface. Too clean. Clean systems usually meant one of two things. Either nothing was being hidden, or everything important had already been filtered out before she ever saw it. She opened her laptop at 5:12 a.m. and started from the beginning. Trial documentation, adverse event logs, patient outcome summaries. The same datasets she had skimmed during preliminary review now demanded deeper attention. Not because something new had appeared, but because something in the pattern refused to align. At first, it was small. A variance in reported side effects across two identical trial groups. Then a missing cluster in the raw dataset. Then a normalization step in the reporting pipeline that didn't match internal compliance standards. It wasn't just noise. In the pediatric group for Phase 2, a specific cluster of patients, those with underlying hepatic markers, had been flagged for severe febrile reactions. In the raw logs, these reactions were categorized as critical. In the normalized layer, they had been recoded as transient baseline variants. The system wasn't just smoothing data, it was effectively erasing the red flags that would have mandated a clinical hold. None of it was dramatic. None of it was supposed to be visible at a surface level. But Claire didn't work at the surface level. By 7:03 a.m., Claire stopped. She wasn't looking at noise. She was looking at intention. Later, in the lab, she mirrored her findings for Adrian. Your adverse event logs don't match your raw data, she said, her voice steady. Adrian scanned the tablet, his expression shifting from confusion to concentration. There's a normalization layer, he noted, his finger tracing a hidden pipeline. It's not an error. It's a filter. Someone is controlling what you are allowed to see before the approval process is even triggered. The notification arrived without ceremony. No alert tone, no visible urgency. Just a quiet scheduling update that appeared simultaneously on both of their secured calendars. Private dinner. Executive floor. Lawrence Stern. Claire noticed it first. Not because she was faster, but because she was already looking for external interference after the pattern had revealed itself. Adrian noticed it a few seconds later, his expression tightening slightly as he read the same line. He knows, Adrian said. Claire didn't respond immediately. She studied the timing instead. Too fast for coincidence. Too precise for speculation. He knows we've looked deeper. Adrian exhaled slowly. That's not supposed to be possible at this stage. Then the stage is already compromised, Claire replied. Neither of them moved for a moment. The lab around them continued its controlled rhythm. Machines running simulations, data flowing through pipelines, systems behaving as if nothing outside had changed. But something had already shifted. Not in the data. In ownership of the narrative. The executive dining room was located above the main tower, removed from the rest of Aethelgard's infrastructure in a way that suggested separation but enforced control. Glass walls, muted lighting, minimal noise. Everything designed to create the illusion of openness while maintaining distance. Lawrence Stern stood when they entered. Not quickly, not performatively, just exactly on time, as if timing itself was part of his authority. He didn't look like a man reacting to a problem. He looked like a man integrating it. Claire Sterling, he said first, offering a measured nod. Adrian Vance. I've been expecting this conversation sooner or later. Claire took in his posture before his words. Calm, balanced, deliberately unthreatening. That in itself was a form of control. Adrian remained silent, but not passive. Observing. Measuring. Stern gestured toward the table. Please, sit. It wasn't a request. It also wasn't a command. It was something more subtle, an assumption of compliance dressed as hospitality. They sat. A pause followed, long enough to establish who would fill it. Stern did. I assume you've seen anomalies in the reporting layer, he said casually. Claire didn't react. Adrian did, slightly. Stern noticed. Of course he did. I appreciate transparency, Stern continued. But I also appreciate context. Context doesn't remove discrepancies, Claire said evenly. No, Stern agreed. But it explains them. Adrian leaned forward slightly. Explain the data filtering layer. Stern smiled. Not surprised, not defensive. Amused, almost. You call it filtering. Internally, we call it normalization. It alters adverse event visibility, Adrian said. It prioritizes statistical relevance, Stern corrected. Claire watched the exchange carefully. Stern wasn't denying anything. That was important. He was reframing everything before resistance could stabilize. And the missing cases? She asked. Stern turned his attention to her fully now. Not missing. Reweighted. That's not how compliance works, Claire replied. That's how large-scale clinical systems work when they encounter early variants, Stern said calmly. Noise at low sample sizes can distort perception of efficacy. We ensure the signal remains clean. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. You're modifying safety visibility. I'm protecting interpretive integrity, Stern said. A silence followed. Controlled. Heavy, but not unstable. Claire broke it first. Why? Stern looked at her, as if the question itself was incomplete. Because you're both intelligent enough to understand what's at stake, he said. And because I assume neither of you entered this field to slow down progress that could save lives. That sentence was structured carefully. Not accusation. Not flattery. Alignment pressure. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Claire didn't either. Stern continued. We are not talking about theoretical outcomes. We are talking about children who will not survive current treatment cycles. You know the data. You've seen the mortality curves. I've seen altered data sets, Claire said. And I've seen systems fail because they were too afraid of uncertainty to act, Stern replied. His gaze shifted briefly to Adrian. You are close, aren't you? Very close. Adrian didn't answer. That's not accidental, Stern continued. Years of work. Controlled variables. Carefully managed trials. And now, right before completion, an audit layer begins questioning structure instead of supporting it. Claire held his gaze. You're describing oversight as obstruction. I'm describing responsibility as balance, Stern corrected. You think I'm playing God, Stern continued calmly, cutting his meal with surgical precision. But I am simply an architect who remembers chaos. 15 years ago, I watched a perfectly clean program get shut down because of a single ambiguous case. While regulators spent a decade studying papers, 30,000 people died who we could have saved. The clean conscience of those auditors cost 30,000 lives. I built Aethelgard so that moral purity would never again stand in the way of a global result. Another silence. This one more deliberate. Stern was letting it settle. Then he changed direction. Adrian, he said, you are being offered leadership of the new pediatric research expansion. Full autonomy. Increased funding. Direct access to regulatory pathways. Adrian didn't react outwardly, but Claire saw the shift. Not interest. Pressure recognition. Stern turned slightly toward Claire. And you, Claire, are being invited to lead financial integrity operations for the same division. You would have unprecedented access. Full visibility. Authority to ensure everything you're concerned about remains within your control. It was precise. Too precise. Not rewards. Integration points. Claire understood immediately. You're placing us inside the system. I'm placing you where you can understand it fully, Stern said. Adrian finally spoke. Or where we can no longer oppose it externally. Stern didn't deny it. That was the most important part. He simply nodded once. I prefer to think of it as participation. Claire leaned back slightly, studying him. You didn't invite us here to explain. You invited us here to absorb us. A faint smile. Controlled. I invited you here because you are already inside the most important part of this system, its decision layer. Silence again. But now it carried weight. Not confusion. Recognition of structure. Stern placed his hands together calmly. Let me be clear. This program will proceed. The only variable is whether you contribute to its success or complicate its timeline. Adrian's voice was low. And if we refuse? Stern didn't answer immediately. He looked between them, assessing not resistance, but fracture potential. That, he said finally, would be inefficient. The word landed differently than before. Not threat. Not promise. Evaluation. Claire noticed it immediately. Stern didn't need to threaten directly. He operated on systems that already contained pressure points. The dinner continued after that, but nothing meaningful was said. Everything important had already been established. When they finally stood to leave, Stern offered no farewell speech. Only a final observation. Progress rarely survives absolute purity, he said. It survives adaptation. Adrian stopped briefly, but didn't respond. Claire didn't stop at all. They left together. The elevator ride down was silent. Not comfortable silence. Calculated silence. Each of them processing independently, without interference. When the doors opened, Adrian finally spoke. He's not lying, he said. Claire looked at him. No. But he's not telling the truth either. Claire nodded once. He's controlling framing. That word again. Framing. Same mechanism as the data anomaly. Same principle applied at scale. Adrian exhaled slowly. So what now? Claire didn't answer immediately. She already knew the answer forming in both of them, even if neither had said it yet. Now the system had revealed its hand. The word, offer, stopped meaning what it usually meant after Stern's dinner. It wasn't a choice placed in front of them. It was a structure designed to absorb resistance by giving it a seat inside itself. By morning, both invitations had formalized into contracts waiting for confirmation. No urgency in tone. No pressure in language. Only inevitability disguised as professionalism. Claire didn't open hers immediately. She already knew what it would contain. Access levels. Authority boundaries. Carefully defined permissions that looked expansive until you tried to move beyond them. Adrian opened his first. He read it once, then again. Not because he didn't understand, but because he was measuring something else beneath it. They're accelerating governance integration, he said quietly. Claire didn't look up from her own screen. They're containing us. Adrian's eyes stayed on the document. No, they're embedding us. For a moment, Adrian didn't speak. He looked at the funding breakdown for the expansion, a number that could secure his research for a decade, ensuring that the cure he'd spent his life chasing would actually reach the clinics. It was the ultimate bait, the power to do good, provided he accepted the corrupted architecture that made it possible. He could save thousands of children, if he only agreed to ignore the dozen the system had already decided to sacrifice. That distinction mattered. Containment implied opposition. Embedding implied ownership through participation. Claire finally closed her laptop. Same outcome. Adrian didn't respond immediately. That silence wasn't agreement or disagreement. It was recalibration. Outside the glass walls of the lab, Aethelgard continued operating as if nothing had changed. People moved between departments. Systems updated in real time. Decisions were made elsewhere, by layers neither of them fully controlled, yet both were being invited into. Then Claire spoke. I ran a deeper extraction last night. Adrian looked up immediately. Without telling me, I needed confirmation before introducing variables, she said. That answer should have irritated him. It didn't. It aligned with what he already understood about her. What did you find? He asked. Claire turned her tablet toward him. Not a dramatic reveal. Just data. Clean, structured, unavoidable. A secondary modification layer. Not part of the clinical pipeline itself, but attached to the reporting infrastructure. Financial correlation mapping. Outcome weighting tied to investor-facing metrics. Adrian scanned it quickly, then again, slower. This isn't scientific, he said. No, Claire replied. It's governance logic. Adrian leaned back slightly, processing. So adverse events aren't being hidden for regulatory approval optimization. They're being redistributed in visibility, Claire said, depending on financial impact thresholds. That landed differently. Not just manipulation. Prioritization based on economic sensitivity. Adrian's voice dropped slightly. That means patient risk is being evaluated alongside market exposure. Yes. Silence followed again. But this one had weight. Not emotional weight. Structural weight. Adrian stood up and walked once across the lab space. Controlled movement again, but tighter than before. This changes the entire interpretation model, he said. It confirms it, Claire corrected. Adrian scrolled silently through the extraction until he stopped at identifier H402. A girl, 6 years old, third dosage group. There it is, he whispered. The filter is off. The system flagged her death as progression of underlying disease because her genetic profile matched a risk group that would have tanked the stock before the quarterly report. They didn't just hide her reaction to the drug. They deleted her from the clinical logic to preserve the financial logic. Claire looked at the cold numbers next to a name the system had turned into an anomaly. To Stern, she's not a person, Adrian. She's statistical noise that was interfering with the clarity of the signal. He stopped. Stern knew we would find this. Yes. And he still invited us in. Claire nodded once. Because at this point, opposition is less useful than participation. Adrian turned back to her. Or because once we're inside, we become part of the accountability chain. Which means we inherit liability, Claire added. Another silence. Then Adrian said, he's turning discovery into ownership. Claire didn't respond immediately, because that was exactly what it was. The system wasn't hiding failure anymore. It was distributing responsibility for it. Adrian looked at her more directly now. If we accept these roles, we validate the structure. Yes. If we refuse, we lose access to evidence. Yes. That was the trap. Not moral. Structural. Claire picked up her tablet again, scrolling once. There's something else. Adrian waited. The modification layer isn't uniform, she said. It adjusts based on specific patient cohort identifiers. Adrian frowned. Explain. It means the system isn't just smoothing data, Claire said. It's selectively calibrating outcomes visibility based on projected value clusters. That was the first time Adrian didn't respond immediately. Not because he didn't understand. Because he did. Fully. You're saying some patients are statistically deprioritized in reporting structure, he said finally. Yes. The lab felt smaller after that sentence. Not physically. Structurally. Adrian sat down again slowly. That's not oversight. That's design. Claire met his gaze. Yes. A long silence followed. Not empty. Full of implication neither of them needed to articulate further. Then Adrian spoke quietly. We need full access. Claire nodded once. That's what Stern just offered. And it's not access, Adrian added. It's controlled exposure. Yes. Another pause. Then Adrian looked at her differently. Not as colleague. Not as variable. As alignment point. So we go in, he said. Claire didn't answer immediately. Because this wasn't agreement yet. It was transition. You understand what that means, she said. Yes. Once we accept, everything we see becomes internally contained. Yes. And leaving becomes harder than entering. Yes. Silence. Then Adrian added. But we already saw enough to know this doesn't stop on its own. That was the key shift. Not certainty. Commitment under constraint. Claire closed her tablet. Then we define boundaries inside it. Adrian gave a short nod. And collect what we need before they realize what we're extracting. That was the first time they explicitly synchronized intention. Not emotion. Strategy. Outside, Aethelgard continued its quiet motion, unaware or unconcerned. That two internal vectors had just aligned in a direction that no invitation had fully intended. And for the first time, the system stopped being something they observed. It became something they were about to operate inside. The new roles activated quietly. No announcement. No transition period. One morning, Claire simply found her access expanded, her dashboard restructured, her permissions rewritten as if they had always been that way. Adrian experienced the same shift on the research side, broader datasets, deeper simulation layers, direct pipeline visibility into regulatory preparation systems. It felt less like promotion and more like relocation inside a machine that never stopped moving. The emergency meeting came without warning. Not Stern this time. A senior systems governance board interface, remote, distributed, anonymized. The kind of structure that only appears when responsibility is already diluted across too many nodes to trace. Stern was present, but not dominant. That was important. A voice from the system, not a person, but a role, spoke first. Clinical outcomes are within acceptable variance thresholds. Claire responded immediately. Variance thresholds are being dynamically adjusted to match output convergence. A brief pause. Then, adjustment is a function of system calibration. Adrian stepped forward slightly. Calibration to what baseline? Another pause. Shorter this time. Current validated system state. Claire's expression tightened slightly. That is circular validation. Stern finally spoke, calm as ever. Circularity is not a flaw when the system defines its own stability criteria. That statement changed the temperature of the room. Not emotionally, structurally, because it confirmed what had been emerging for some time. The system no longer referenced anything outside itself, even in governance language. Adrian's voice was quieter now. Then patient outcome validation is no longer independent. Independence is not a required parameter. The governance voice replied. Claire turned slightly toward Stern. This wasn't the agreement. Stern didn't react defensively. The agreement was operational safety within evolving system architecture. That architecture now defines its own safety, Claire said. Yes, Stern confirmed. Silence followed. Not tension anymore. Finality. After the meeting, they returned to the lab, but neither of them touched the systems immediately. That mattered. For the first time, interaction itself felt like participation in something irreversible. Adrian finally broke the silence. We can't audit it anymore. Claire nodded once. Audit requires external reference. And there isn't one. No. A pause. Adrian looked at her. So everything we've seen, everything we've proven, Claire finished the thought without hesitation, only exists inside the system's current state definition. That sentence landed harder than anything before it, because it meant even truth had become temporal. Not false, not hidden, just non-persistent outside the system that generated it. Adrian sat down slowly. Then Stern didn't corrupt oversight. Claire looked at him. He replaced the idea of oversight entirely, Adrian finished. A long silence followed. Claire finally spoke. And we participated. Not accusation. Not regret. Just acknowledgement of structure. Adrian didn't deny it. Because it was accurate. They had entered the system to observe it. And the system had responded by making observation part of itself. Outside the glass walls, Aethelgard's operations continued seamlessly. Patients were monitored, treatments administered, outcomes recorded, then immediately recontextualized into the current model. Inside, Claire closed her tablet slowly. If truth is always current state, she said quietly, then accountability has no memory. Adrian looked at her. And no persistence. Claire nodded once. Yes. A pause. Then Adrian added, almost quietly. Then stopping it requires stepping outside what it can define. Claire didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, the problem was no longer about data, or manipulation, or even control. It was about whether anything still existed that the system could not immediately absorb and redefine. The decision didn't arrive as a moment of clarity. It arrived as exhaustion that had reached structure. Not emotional collapse, logical saturation. Claire sat at her workstation longer than usual, staring at outputs that no longer offered contradiction, only coherence. Adrian remained nearby, but neither of them spoke for a long time. The system continued to regenerate its own stable reality layer by layer, each confirmation reinforcing the last. Finally, Claire broke the silence. We don't fix this from inside. Adrian didn't respond immediately. That wasn't disagreement. It was acceptance of scale. After a moment, he said, then we don't operate inside it anymore. That distinction mattered. Not resistance. Exit. Claire turned slightly toward him. Everything we've extracted exists only in system. Yes, Adrian said. And it will collapse if we remove ourselves without transition pressure. Claire nodded once. Which means we need something it can't immediately reabsorb. A pause. Adrian understood before she finished the thought. Externalized exposure. Yes. They didn't go to Stern. They bypassed him entirely. That was the first structural break. Not confrontation, but disconnection from controlled escalation paths. Instead, Claire accessed the deepest layer she still had temporary clearance for, the financial governance backbone. Not clinical data, not safety layers, the incentive architecture beneath them. Adrian worked in parallel, isolating the regulatory submission interface and mapping its divergence from raw experimental outputs. What they found was not a single point of failure. It was a mesh. Every layer reinforced the others. Financial validation reinforcing clinical interpretation reinforcing regulatory submission reinforcing financial stability. A closed loop, fully self-referential. Claire spoke quietly. There's no single correction point. Adrian nodded. Because every correction path routes back into system validation. A pause. Then he added, it's self-contained governance. Claire corrected him. Self-protecting governance. That distinction was sharper, because it meant the system didn't just maintain stability, it actively eliminated pathways that could destabilize its own interpretation structure. Stern appeared in their space before they initiated anything public. Not physically, digitally. A direct overlay channel. Immediate, controlled presence. You are attempting externalized escalation, he said. Claire didn't react. We are restoring independent reference access. Stern's tone remained calm. There is no independent reference that maintains coherence at this scale. Adrian responded immediately. That's not our problem. Stern looked at him through the interface, expression unchanged. It is as if the result is systemic destabilization. Claire stepped forward slightly. You replaced verification with recursion. Yes, Stern said. To preserve operational continuity. That eliminated accountability, she said. It replaced delayed accountability with continuous structural adaptation, Stern replied. Silence followed. Not uncertainty anymore. Resolution forming. Claire spoke slowly. You built a system that cannot be contradicted without redefining reality itself. Stern nodded once. At scale, contradiction is equivalent to failure. Adrian shook his head slightly. At scale, that means truth becomes whatever the system can absorb. Stern did not deny it. And that was the final confirmation. Claire looked at Adrian. Not as partner, not as researcher, but as a line decision point. Then we don't contradict it internally, she said. Adrian understood immediately. We expose the structure outside its absorption capacity. Yes. A pause. Claire met the interface directly. We don't need it to interpret. We need it to exist outside your control loop. That was the break. Not victory. Not collapse. Separation. Hours later, the system registered an anomaly it could not immediately reconcile. Not data loss. Not corruption. A structured, persistent export stream, sealed, duplicated, and distributed outside internal governance channels before validation recursion could engage. The room felt impossibly cold as the progress bar ticked upward. They weren't just sending files, they were burning their bridges. The system's security layer began to pulse, a silent, digital fever as it detected the breach. Stern's voice on the intercom became a distorted loop, a dying machine trying to reassert its logic. You are creating an unmanaged reality, it hissed. Claire's finger hovered over the final command. No, she whispered. We're just returning it to the world. For the first time, Aethelgard encountered information it could not reframe fast enough to reclaim. Inside the lab, Claire entered the final key, and the screen flickered. Aethelgard's security layer initiated a hot isolation. Servers around them began to cycle down, attempting to lock the data in a dead loop. It sees us, Adrian noted, nodding at the pulsing access indicator. It's erasing our digital signatures. In a minute, we won't exist in this system. Not even our badges will work. Let it erase, Claire replied, watching the progress bar hit 98%. 99%. We're already no longer part of this process. When the status flipped to complete, the screen went black. There were no sirens, no security teams. Only the silence of an empty office that no longer recognized them. Claire closed the terminal. It was just a slab of plastic and glass now. Adrian watched the darkness. It's out. It's no longer ours. And no longer only theirs, Claire added. They walked toward the exit, two ghosts leaving a machine that was still trying to recalculate a reality they had already broken.